Hey everybody, it's Tom Alexander. I'm the head of AI at Cross Country Consulting, and this is Fieldnotes. Today, we've got a distinguished guest, Cade Lutz, our source-to-pay leader here at Cross Country. Cade has brought amazing value to our clients, value creation across the end-to-end process, and we look forward to hearing from him today. So welcome to you, Cade.
Thanks, Tom. Good to be here.
It's great to have you. And Cade is a personal friend of mine. We have been hanging out for a few years here, both of us from PwC, where we spent a lot of years and drove a lot of value, and now landed here at Cross Country, a great place. But Cade, tell us about yourself. Tell us what you want the listeners to know about you.
Sure. Yeah. From career-wise, I started in the automotive world, right? So if I think about procurement, source to pay as a career, started around 2000. Think of a time when the manufacturing, the auto industry was really changing, transforming. So Lean Six Sigma was a big deal at that time. I literally saw plants go from, I spent my day just going and finding parts, to a completely lean experience where I was playing little games on my old BlackBerry, right? So went there and then spent 14 years at PwC. That was really, I wanted the project work, the client work. I love new things. That was strategy and operations with a focus on procurement and supply chain. So I saw the evolution of consulting at that time. And it's really going from the operating model of a company to the introduction of technology at big ERPs that then went into digital. So you're talking RPA, you're talking machine learning, the early days of what was going to transform supply chain. So did that for 14 years and then got a call on a Friday from Eric Lynn. I was not looking to leave PwC whatsoever. And I always say he gave some sort of wizardry and showed me this vision of Cross Country, and it really fit into what I believed was the right way to do consulting. So I had a client one time call it insultants, right? The insultants are coming in, and I wanted to be a consultant or a prosultant even, right? So I came over to Cross Country. I've been here 5 years now, and really I own the transformation and sourcing capability. So what that means is, how do I go add value, give the branding of procurement to organizations, source to pay, and bring that to life for our clients. And just the culture of Cross Country fits so well with my personality. I've been having a blast for the past 5 years and really driving a lot of value for my clients.
Okay, so Cade, we talked a little bit about your background, and I think that plays nicely into what we're talking about today. So source to pay process, sometimes heavily capital intensive. Supply chain starts to play into that in a very big way, and it forms that process. There's so much up and downstream from source to pay where value is created in a business. Just want to talk about the process a little bit and how you provide the service.
Yeah, so the first thing that most don't know, so supply chain, we call it indirect and direct. There's two different types of companies, right? So if you think about an indirect type world, that could be financial services. It could be a SaaS type company. They don't really manufacture a product, right? So that's a certain type of procurement, not as much of a supply chain in that world. And then you have the direct side, which is more your manufacturing type companies, industrial products, services. That's a world where procurement's just a part of a broader supply chain. So we call it plan, source, manufacture, make, deliver, and return. That's a supply chain. So all aspects in a direct world have to combine and work together. So those types of projects become much more complex, and where procurement takes a certain role to an overall supply chain process. So in our world, we kind of divide between those two things, and it drives a different way of thinking about it. And for some of the indirect type companies, they're thinking about services. They're thinking about making it easier for their people to buy, versus a supply chain world where you have to fit into an inventory world, a logistics world. There could be work orders and other types of things. So there's a lot of different complexity in how we approach it. But the three main things to think about with procurement, no matter what type of company it is, it's really meant to do three things. So number one, save money, right? That's usually the remit. And when you talk to a CFO or anybody else, hey, I want my supply chain or my procurement team to save me money, right? A little Jerry Maguire, show me the money, right? Number two is make it efficient and make it easy to buy something. This is the challenge for many companies, right? You got up to 80% of your stakeholders are engaged in some way in a source to pay or a procurement process. And most people don't think about that. So if that process is not working, then all of a sudden you're starting to slow down the business, cycle times are longer. The third thing is improve controls, mitigate risk. So if you think about the controlled process of things, and then third-party risks, right? You have a bunch of suppliers that are coming to do work with you. That could be a big challenge for companies. And how do I make sure the suppliers that I use are the right suppliers, they're financially viable, so on and so forth. So that's how we look at it from a business perspective and how we try to drive that value for our clients.
Okay, that 80% number, that's a big number. That may surprise some people out there. Tell us about, who are those constituents that are touching this process?
Yeah, so you think about finance, FP&A, they're doing a planning, a budget. Done right, procurement's going to be involved in that planning process with FP&A. You've got risk and compliance team. So again, third-party risk, big topic right now, one of the top 3 or 4 topics going on. How do I make sure that procurement is engaged with that risk process? Because people are buying things end to end. That's going to be a big point in a procurement process. And then you have AP. You have AP, you have accounting, you have tax, the finance back office, big part of it, and something that those stakeholders have. They're kind of the downstream part of a procurement process. Upstream, business requesters, downstream, AP finance. To make it work, you've got to have everything orchestrate really well.
Okay, yeah. So value creation, you touched on a lot of different places there that it can be created, whether it be through efficiencies, whether it be through just purchasing in general and having more data and insights that you're able to produce, right? So tell us how you talk to clients about value creation, maybe some client examples that you've been able to give out there and deliver.
So that's the fun part, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I get to go talk to a CFO, let's call it, a $5 billion company. And back of the napkin, I can walk in and say, what if I told you I can save you $250 million? And I can do that with an ROI of 50 to 1 possibly, right? That's a big number, but that's where we come in. And that's ultimately in a full transformation, generally speaking, the expectation of the value that you create. So how do you do that, right, is the problem. And the way that we come in with it is it's a very methodical approach, but very data intensive on the front end. We have a tool that we call Sarah, right? Really, that's spend analytics, right? But working with you, that's been a tool that we've been able to go from, it can take up to 4 weeks sometimes in the past to understand how am I spending my money, and then how do you get that categorized, simplified, so that you know exactly where you're spending your money across the company. You'd be amazed at how many clients just don't know where they're spending their money. So that's the starting point to it. We get to a point where we can then talk about process, the overall operating model. So you're thinking the people, the organization, the roles and accountabilities, to the processes being standardized, to the technology that's enabling these types of things. So, but that $250 million number, I remember one time I went to a client and I had a 1-hour meeting with them to try to engage in this. I had done some research, and I said, coming out of the meeting, I said, do you realize that meeting just cost you $200,000? You've just lost $200,000 because you haven't transformed your procurement organization. And that's when they just took a step back. And it was tough. It was a energy type company struggling immensely. And as we walked through that project, believe it or not, we got $250 million, a little bit more than that we actually were able to bring to the table for them. And that's how we like to engage on the cost side. But that cost comes from sourcing. So you got to have the elements right. You got to understand the budgets. You got to have our Sarah tool is something that quickly identifies by category. How are you spending your money? How many suppliers? In some cases, you may see 100 suppliers that they're buying from just one item. Many of them are buying retail, right? They're not leveraging the spend of their company. We help organize that, put the strategy forward within that very quickly. Once you do that, though, you got to have the entire process work. So what we see in a lot of clients is you've identified the savings, you get a contract in place, but nobody uses that contract. So all of a sudden that starts to leak out. So when you think about the process and the operating model of what we do, we want to make sure that we identify the savings, but we deliver it, better contracts, and then the process is in place to be able to deliver on that.
Yeah. So Sarah is actually our first mention of AI, right? So far, you've talked about operating model, you've talked about the end-to-end process. But Sarah is an agent that we developed to help with some of the discovery around what is the state of the client's data? Do they have the right categories? Can you just talk us through how you designed the tool? We worked together on that. We worked with our data and analytics function, right, to build that. But this is how we're bringing AI to our engagements every day. But tell us about the design and what you were looking to achieve with Sarah.
This has been, I'll call it the holy grail of procurement for so long, and that there's been the strong arming of having to go through Google and identify suppliers and what category are they in and all these different types of things. So thank you, number one, for helping us build this, because that 4-week process can now be done in less than a week, right? So that goes down to leveraging AI to look at client data, invoice data, PO data, vendor data, contract data and using the tools that you've helped us bring to the table, very quickly giving a summary of how they're spending their money, but also categorizing that. So where are you spending that money? All the way down to nuts and bolts, right? If the data's right, we can get it down to a very discrete level of detail. So I know how much money I'm spending on bolts for a company. And I can do that really rapidly. And imagine the power of that. So there's 1,000 suppliers that might supply bolts. You've got 3 and you don't have a great contract with them, but they supply bolts and they supply a whole host of other things. Now we know how much money we're spending, so that you use that company leveraged procurement and you say, all right, I'm going to put this out to the market and I've got very discrete data here that's telling me this is what I'm spending. I work with my planning team, my FP&A team. How much do we expect to spend the year ahead? And now you've got the opportunity to save a good amount of money. So Sarah's a tool that's been able to bring that to life really quickly for us and identify gaps. So if you think of quality gaps, and this is the challenge for so many companies, hey, my vendor data is really poor. I have all these suppliers. I don't know the supplier name. There's duplicates. So the tool can help bring to life not just the savings opportunity and the categorization, but where am I wrong? And that's where we can start helping them think more broadly. You can try to save money, you can go get a contracted savings, but again, delivering that savings can sometimes be more challenging.
Yeah. Well, what I love about your team, Cade, is that you not only do the data analysis and put the categorization together, you don't just drop it off. You all have spent time in sourcing before, right? So you have folks on the team that have spent time in practice in corporate doing that. So we provide that service actually to some companies as well, right? So you take it all the way through end to end and actually do some of the negotiation to bring that savings to life.
Yeah, I mean, put your money where your mouth is, right?
Yeah.
So, my favorite basketball player is Kobe Bryant, right? So it's like Kobe was disciplined, everything else. Those are the people I went and hired, were the people that they were good human beings, tremendous amount of sourcing experience. So I've got people on my team, Matt Joyner, he's negotiated fighter jet buttons, right? Like all the way down to raw materials and 20 years plus of experience. Michael Junger, 25 years of experience, solely focused on this. These are guys that have saved billions of dollars for clients in their careers. So their ability to go in and deliver it. So it's one thing to identify it, right? And this is back to the insultants. The insultants, they identify it and then they go home and there's a nice PowerPoint deck sitting on the table, right? Consultants, good consultants are ones that say, here's what it is. Let me go deliver this for you. That's the turn of what good looks like. And with this firm, the flexibility, the nimble nature of what we do, we've gone out and hired the best. I can't believe we brought some of these folks in, right? And they're out there delivering with some of the biggest companies in the world right now.
Really talented team. Yeah, I love working with you guys. So I think we've drained the value creation point. Point
right.
made,
I could go all day
focused.
long.
Yeah,
Sure.
Hundreds of millions of dollars. You've caught everybody's attention with that. Back to AI. Sure. So Sarah's one way that you start that process. You start gathering data, but what are you seeing just across the entire landscape of source to pay, end-to-end, orchestration, different things you can do with tools? And we talk a lot on this podcast about different frameworks of build versus buy and how we talk to our clients about what do you choose? There's so much out there and there's so much on the come that is being built in the backlog of software companies, right? So we tend to think, do you activate features and just continue to buy? Could be point solutions, could be within a Coupa or a Jagger or tools that are kind of at the front end of your process or end-to-end process. Or do you build this? Do you build something end-to-end where you're moving the data somewhere, you're building agentic framework, multi-agent framework to kind of orchestrate the process? Talk us through where you're seeing AI in a big way across source to pay.
Yeah, and I'll lean on how I think about companies, right? So if I look at an indirect world, and the beauty of cross country is we work with clients of all sizes. And let's take a $700 million company or even a $1.5 billion company in technology or a SaaS world, right? They've gone out and they've bought the shiny new object in some cases. So they might have 10 to 15 systems that are working in a source to pay framework. They've got an ERP, they bought a risk tool, they bought a contract tool, they bought some sort of sourcing tool. We call that the Franken tool or the Frankenstein. And a shout out to one of my clients who I call it the Frankenstein process. She said Franken tool, right? And I go, perfect. So they've bought these tools that make big promises. The problem is those tools don't connect. So there's a terminology, procurement orchestration, that's come in the past couple years, which is really leveraging AI to help bring down that data from the different, maybe best of breed systems, but be able to explain where requesters are in the process. So we use a term called guided buying. You need to guide users to how they can use the right contracts, the right suppliers, go through a risk process with ease. It's a very, very difficult thing for clients to do, and it causes a lot of frustration in the procurement world. So think about, in some cases, 3 or 4 months to get through a contracting process. The AI tools now are starting to think about bringing that to life so they know exactly where things are. I can use a chatbot and say, where is my contract for X, Y, and Z? And that answer gets put in right away. You put cycle times next to that, you know the user that's involved in it, and you can go get that answer right away. So we see a lot of movement for what we'll call the indirect world, technology spaces, to just clean up that guided buying experience through procurement orchestration. That's a big part there. As we go into the downstream parts of procurement, this is when you get into the P2P, the buying, the POs and the invoices. We're seeing a lot on the invoicing side, right? So we think about there's some agentic that's starting to come in and starting to think about coding and other things, but we're also seeing tools like Rossum. Rossum's come in. They've done an amazing job of being able to use AI to be able to translate a lot of this and document reading and other things, being able to code things automatically, leveraging their data to be able to inform what is a very difficult process for many companies right now. So again, where you're throwing individuals at a problem, now you're starting to see a lot of simplicity come in. We're seeing a lot in that space. So that's more of a single solution. And then you have tools like Coupa, right? Coupa's taken the angle. It's your leading platform in source to pay. There's other great companies out there as well, but they're thinking of a agentic world, right? So they've bought the end-to-end of source to pay. So sourcing, contracting, risk, buying, spend analytics a little bit that we talked about before. They have an approach, if we can do everything, they're thinking about building that agentic world throughout it. So all we call the seams of the process, there's a lot of handoffs that occur. They're thinking of an agentic world that connects it all together with good data, good benchmarking to be able to highlight the fastest way to do things. So that gets back to that efficiency side of it, which ultimately can help enable the value that you identify on the front end.
Yeah. And some of the big platforms, it's very much in progress, some of the builds, right? Not picking on Coupa, but just clients get impatient with wanting to produce results now, right? So that's why we're starting to see some of the build, and you have some code that is at your disposal now. More than ever before, data engineering has been democratized a little bit. Mm-hmm. So people are trying to build some distinct solutions that they can just use and stand up. But longer term, where is the bet? What are in the backlogs, some of the these companies and the software that you own? Those are the considerations that we're putting in front of clients as well. What do you want to invest in? What's the right tech architecture end to end? You don't want to build a Franken tool, that's for sure.
That's right. And again, that's where we meet them where they are. And each client is a little bit different on their journey. The use cases, they're out there. Some are working, some are not. But when we think of things from, you have to understand the operating model. You have to understand your data. There's some basics that need to be in place, and that's where my team typically comes in. So we, strategy through execution or strategy through delivery. If you don't have the right strategy and you don't connect the dots of this 80% and have a single strategy with the technology framework, with the sourcing opportunity, with the people that need to be able to support this. These are new roles that you're going to see in the future. If you don't think about that on the front end and think that the technology or the AI is just going to support things, you're going to be in for a challenge. So part of our work is really thinking about what is the value prop of this, but then what's the roadmap moving forward to go deliver on that.
Okay. Is that where an engagement starts then, Cade? Is it a strategy session, discovery session? Tell us about an engagement end to end. How do you get into people, process, data, and technology, and how do you engage this 80%, the masses that you're talking about here?
Yeah. So, and this is the beauty of cross country, I think, is we have a strong hypothesis of what things should look like. So we come in with knowing what good looks like, but we also want to understand the organization, and companies want to do this rapidly. They don't want to spend the word assessment, right? It's kind of I don't like the word assessment, maybe a rapid diagnostic, but you're talking about hundreds and hundreds of stakeholders that need a common approach to things. So we come in very, very quick interviews. We have a data-backed process. So I want any recommendation we give to have 2 to 3 data-informed insights into that. So we have benchmarking, we have maturity models, we have the Sarah tool and the spend analytics. So usually we're going into future state sessions. We've got our HCD practice, which does an amazing job of bringing it to life and helping to connect the dots between our clients. So in many cases, these individuals have never talked. So you have AP in the room and you have procurement in the room and you have a few business people. I'm going into one next week. These individuals have never all been in a room together. And we're going to talk about what that roadmap will look like. So we want data to inform the future, standardize the future state process, understand the tech architecture, prioritize the opportunities, build a roadmap that connects the dots together. So usually in anywhere from 2 to 5 weeks, if it's a very large company, we can move this very rapidly. But they're going to have a roadmap, very discrete, with value that they can go achieve, ready to go and ready to action in a very short amount of time. That's the goal that we want. And then you're handing it off to what's the tech roadmap? How many people do we need to hire? How do we need to move roles from a transactional role? Hey, let's put them into more of a value-adding role now that we're going to have the time. So that whole movement of the operating model is something that we focus in on quickly.
Yeah, so you mentioned the term HCD, right? So human-centered design. We have a practice that helps us facilitate, some of this discovery work that you talked about, right? And that's where we bring it together in a workshop, right? So we do some work up front, we do the interviews, we go through the process, we bring our hypothesis, but then that's that opportunity to connect and to use design thinking to, let's get the right user journey going forward. Let's establish something that's going to work for everybody. We can all stack hands at the end of this workshop. Everybody knows their role and responsibility going forward. So the HCD term is something that very much is associated with that building over the course of time and grew up there, because you're thinking every day about what is the experience of everyone that intersects with this process, right? So little plug for HCD practice and the amazing facilitators we have to bring everybody together.
I might mention one thing on that too, Tom. So one of my favorite things on projects is when I walk in, it's usually the AP organization. It's always a challenge because they get all the flow of information downstream and they're like the investigators or the detectives that try to figure out what the heck went wrong, right? So when I walk into a room with the head of AP, 9 out of 10 times I just see wide-eyed, like the hair's on fire. My favorite thing to do on projects is to say, I look at the AP manager on day one and I look at them at the end, and once we get a transformation through, and I give them their life back. Yeah. You see the change that can come in that organization, and recognizing and telling the company, hey, it's not their fault. It's rarely their fault. It's happening somewhere upstream in the process. So when you fix that and then you see the result, it goes back to my Ford days, right? I was in a plant stacked high with a bunch of boxes to playing, I think it was like Minesweeper. I can't remember the games back then, right? Probably back for the audience, but you see that transformation unfold, and it truly makes a difference into how these people do their jobs. So that AP manager is one that I always like to highlight.
Okay, I love that story. And that is that's finance 101, right? Like the finance function, they close the books, they ingest the data, the AP function, they're at the tail end of that process, right? They're just trying to get the payment out the door. But there's so much upstream, so many processes that then flow into the ledger to try to get this stuff done. And it's like, what's wrong with that finance team? It's rarely the finance team's fault, right? And that's what we think about all the time, is fixing those upstream processes and the end-to-end.
The different groups don't always talk, right? And you should care about your stakeholders, whether that's your internal stakeholders in a company, suppliers are stakeholders, right? So when we think about procurement, it's, identifying all these touch points, and it's the whole company again. 80% of the people are involved in this. Put some care into it, and sometimes that requires others to understand the pain that you're causing on the back end. So once you bring that to life and you put that on top of it, you can really see a lot of great results across the board.
Yeah, these human stories are never more prevalent than with AI in the picture, right? Like this is that moment when everybody's wondering, there's uncertainty. The power of the tool is not uncertain, right? There's so much power to it and capability. It's a very human moment that's necessary right now when we're going through these projects. Like, let's create those strategic roles of the future so that these companies can scale. So back to AI a little bit here. We talked about people, process, data, and technology. Let's hit on the data component of that. So we all know that data is absolutely the unlock for successful AI and orchestration, some of the things and concepts that you talked about. How do you think about data quality in source to pay and AI's effectiveness as a result of cleaning some of that stuff up?
Yeah, so we've talked about spend analytics. You need good data. It doesn't have to be perfect to be able to get the insights that are required. Think about your vendor master. So the big data components in a source to pay process: vendor master, purchase orders, invoice data. You need to have an under contract data, right? So the cleanliness of that data and the structuring of that data can enable a lot of efficiency across the board. It's very rarely in good shape. So when you think about AI coming in to help identify where those problems are very quickly, and then you can go fix it. Once you get to that point, you can start thinking about this commodity-based approach. So again, categories, if you think about driving value out of categories, one thing is price, right? Well, I need to know who I'm spending my money with. I need that vendor data to be clean. I need my purchase order to say what I bought. So that purchase order data should be clean. The invoice data, how much did we pay? Invoice payment data. Once you have clarity on that, now you're in a position where you can unlock all the value of that. So the companies that do it well have good, clean data. They have preferred suppliers, and then they go innovate with those suppliers. So the companies that think about it from a value prop perspective, it's not just price. That's one thing. You need quality. You need service level. Once you have good, clean data coming through the system with that, now you can go back to them and say, how can we win-win in this situation? So we look at supplier management. You can get another 5% of savings on top of it. And I've had clients before where there's an arm's length relationship with their suppliers, and we go in and we work and collaborate, and we find win-win. So the client's going to get more revenue. There's different services that they can provide. The supplier can do that, whereas our clients then they can get a lower cost on that. They can combine their spend. So we'll see a 5% increase in cost savings to the supplier, 5% revenue increase or 10% revenue increase, whatever it may be. Those are the types of situations that we try to identify in procurement, but it starts with good, clean data. And so that's the anchor to be able to use all the AI tools out there to be able to drive value.
Yeah. I think of, spent some time as a controller, as a CFO in my past life. And one thing I would call out is bringing that data to the table. We were able to create kind of an operating rhythm around procurement, CFO, FP&A at the table, and then we'd have stakeholders come in that were applying for investments, or it was FP&A kind of bringing the insights to the table and then weaponizing the procurement function. So there's this two-way dialogue where get procurement involved in planning. You mentioned it lightly at the outset, right? They are a strategic provider of data, and it's almost immediately you can adjust your forecast to account for some of the savings that you mentioned or potential revenue creation that was leaking out of the fact that you found this, right? So it's like, these are the intersections that we try to create with the companies that aren't really thinking about, they're thinking about reporting the numbers and just getting the management reporting out the door versus strategically, let's bring it all back and create procurement as a strategic partner.
I love this conversation. We go back and forth with it.
We call it plan to pay.
Yeah,
because
right.
It should be so intersected, the planning process.
The time, and I love your word of weaponized procurement, because I've grown up in this function, doing it in a lot of different sectors. But procurement, for many companies still today, they're the folks in the back of the room, right? They're not involved in the real planning of what's going on with the company, the budgeting, the forecast, all these things. Done well, that works well. So the biggest challenge a CFO often has is procurement says, hey, I just saved $10 million last year. Let's use that as a number. CFO looks at the numbers and they go, I don't see this. I don't see this hitting the bottom line, right? It's a big challenge for companies because they can go negotiate a deal, but that value can leak out or somebody's going to go spend their budget
it on something else,
right.
Spend their budget, right?
So when we talk about our spend analytics tool, that's going to give you your historical spend, which is great, right? And it's going to tell you where you spent your money. When you work in the plan to pay world, it's where are we going to be spending our money? What are the capital projects that are going to be happening? Where do we anticipate the big spend areas? The earlier that you get procurement involved in that process, the more value that they can create for you.
Finance, awesome. We've tied that connection point. There's also a connection point to the risk organization. And you mentioned some of this earlier, just third parties that you're letting into your organization and keeping a close eye on that, vendor risk management, those kind of concepts. That's something that you are also working very closely with your clients on. We'll talk a little bit more about your approach there and what you've been able to derive.
Yeah, it's, again, as I mentioned earlier, maybe one of the top three challenge areas or priorities for a chief procurement officer right now. How do I manage the risk of the supply base? And they are a holder of information at a certain point in this. So I love cross country. We've got Jill Larson, we've got Cameron Over, right? They're cyber. They're the risk and compliance function. So this gets back to collaboration again. So procurement, if you think about orchestration, which we mentioned a little bit, you've got a sourcing event. Then you got to go create a contract. But then when you think about a third-party risk, who am I actually going into business with? Is there financial integrity with that? Are they going to be involved in our IT stack, right? Are they going to be into our systems? Well, if that's the case, I need to go do a cybersecurity check or an information security check. So as it shepherds through the process here, procurement has a really big role, done well, in helping to facilitate that and aggregate that information. So how do you very quickly go through and leverage what we see is what we call the 2B area. There's platforms that can help you identify the financial integrity of a business, the environmental stewardship, so the ESG world comes in. You've got the IT information security world. So these systems can help you provide input into that, give you line of sight to how is the supplier doing, but also the workflow to push that through the process relatively quickly. So that as a company, you're saying, I'm doing business with a company that I trust. And depending on the risk of that company, these systems will allow you to high, medium, low, and push it through that process. Yeah, so we see it as a key area that, done poorly, it extends the cycle time of just getting a contract through. Done well, you're getting the proper checks in the process, and you push it through the process much faster with the suppliers you want to work with.
Spending the time up front with the risk and governance framework is going to save you time and money on the back end. That's strategic risk. And there's AI that can come into the picture here too.
Absolutely.
With the monitoring of this data, with the flagging, with reaching out kind of for external information to tell you about how a vendor may be trending out there, right? So bringing AI into the picture from a continuous monitoring or just insight perspective is a great way to incorporate AI into some of the things that you're talking about.
Yeah, and we see that as, again, we talk about systemic AI and the tools that are out there and the software that's out there. You put other aspects of that in some agentic world in there and actually bringing the risk to the front, right? And being able to analyze the risk of a client and not having people make judgment calls every time. Let the data and let AI inform what this looks like. So we always think about exception process or being able to lean forward. The transactional work we want to kind of pull away. Let there be some analysis done to present something to you. That's the next step of what I see in the risk world. Yeah, but you got to have the infrastructure done first. What are our risk domains? Who are the people involved in this? What are the data sources that are going to inform where things sit? How do we connect this into our technology so that at the end of the day, it's that requester saying, I need somebody to come in and do this service for me. That shouldn't take 3 months. How do we make that a quicker process, but make sure that the company's protected in doing it?
Okay, this has been incredibly informative and holistic, as it always is with you. I'm wondering if you have any parting shots. What do you want to leave the audience with, talking about your team, how you help clients navigate source to pay end to end?
First, I would say, don't forget about your procurement function, right? And that can be a weaponized function for you. That can be what's right now maybe a cost center, that can be a profit center for your organization. Done correctly, that's the way that it can work. I came to cross country because of the culture. I wanted to go build something with people that I felt like had the same mindset that I did, which how do we go make things happen for our clients and do it in a way that we don't just identify it, but we go deliver it. So we have a team that they're 20, 25 years, very deep expertise that have the right attitude and are there to go help our clients go deliver this. So it's a fun journey. It's a hard journey, but it's something that I think as we move forward, it's only going to be getting better. So 25 years in this industry, I feel like the promise of what could be is finally starting to take shape. So I'm looking forward to working with our clients to go deliver that.
Cade, thank you so much for being here. Super informative discussion. And I would just say to the listeners out there, hundreds of millions of dollars of savings Cade talked about, end-to-end orchestration using AI, risk and governance using AI, third-party risk using AI, powered by AI, human-centered design, and just thinking connectivity and bringing the organization together. There's so much value in these things and the approach that Cade takes, and it all starts with the way they look at strategy and think end to end. So reach out to us, experts in source to pay, driving AI through it. And we really thank Cade for being here today. So thanks for tuning in. That's it for Fieldnotes. Talk to you next time.